my mother, that Mr. Owens is.
Don't say a year, but.
Some years. So I just want to warn you people, we've been run out of Northern Kentucky, and so you have to take everything we say with a grain of salt here today. But I'm here to represent the Cincinnati Interfaith Workers Center, and also to tell you a little bit about the work that we do. And in order to do that, I'd like to have it as part of a discussion that Bill and Ed had here in terms of economic inequality. So there's been a whole series here on economic inequality and what it means and how we talk about it, but also, and I think that's why I'm here today too, is to talk about what are some of the responses, the creative responses to the crisis in economic inequality. So what I'd like to do is just to kind of take point of privilege and read to you a little passage from a book from a friend of mine who passed away this past year. Her name was Mary Evelyn Jagan, and she was a sister with Notre Dame, Denham Moore, and she retired here in Cincinnati. And she wrote a book called Just Peacemakers, which collects in one place a lot of great resources. And I was flipping through her book, and I came across a passage that I liked a whole lot. And I'd just like to start by reading from that passage, and then after I do that, we'll start talking about some of the more substantive policy issues, but I just wanted to remember my friend and to quote her book here. It says, "Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possession, but everything they owned was held in common. With great power, the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. Great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned lands or houses sold them, and bought the proceeds of what was sold, and brought the proceeds of what was sold, and they laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as they had need." Does anyone recognize the passage? Acts chapter 4, 32 to 35. So that's, when people ask you about economic inequality and what it all means, there are deep wells that you draw from in order to compare our past as Christians, for those of us who are, and the present. So I'd like you to compare that passage with a statistic I've got somewhere buried in my papers here. It's not in your stuff. There was a study that was done. It was a landmark survey of low-income and immigrant workers in Chicago, LA, and New York. 2008, it was a comprehensive scientific study done by the National Employment Law Project and various universities in each of these cities. And here's what the study found. Fully 26% of the workers sampled were paid less than the legally required minimum wage. Okay? In the previous week. Previous week from when they were surveyed. 26%. 60% of these workers were underpaid by more than $1 per hour. So minimum wage violations. You'll hear folks talk these days about something called wage theft. That's what they're talking about. 26% of low-income workers in Chicago, New York, and LA. Like to have data like that in Cincinnati, but hopefully we'll find a way to do a study. Perhaps it'll turn out that, we're down to 6% in Cincinnati, but I doubt it. I think that that's probably reflective of what's happening in our major cities.
How much money has the Workers Center recovered?
Well, yeah, the Workers Center helps people deal with minimum wage and overtime situations, and over the past 8 years, over $700,000 they've helped other people to collect. So it's a real problem, and that's just an anecdote because we don't deal with everyone from around the city, just a small segment of the population. Yes?
Do you know how many of those are Hispanic immigrants?
Of the folks that the Workers Center deals with, you're talking about 80%, 70 to 80% of those claims are with Hispanic workers. So when we talk about economic inequality, though, what we're dealing with currently, and I think the statistic on minimum wage shows, is we're dealing with a crisis in worker representation. Okay, maybe we shouldn't measure ourselves by Acts chapter 2. Okay, But maybe we should measure ourselves by the extent to which in our major cities people are not being paid a minimum wage and working, as Col explained. Folks are working and not making a minimum wage. And so how did we get here? I'm going to take a little bit of time to just share with you or walk through some of the handouts that I gave. And this talks about the decline in unions as an institution and unions as a part of our private sector economy, right? So the big slide that I'll show you is, it's called Declining Union Density, okay? And it says, as union membership rates decrease, middle class incomes sink. And it shows here that, as has been reported widely in the recent discussions of income inequality, middle class incomes have been sinking. And you see that over the past decades, as the same thing has been happening with union membership, and union and the labor organizations' participation in the workforce has been declining, okay? And that is something that is part of a global trend, but you'll also notice one of the slides you have there, it's not inevitable. The decline in Canada is much slower. In Canada, there's still a much larger part of the private sector workforce that's represented by unions. Now, you might want to know what a union gets you. Okay, well, I'm not going to give you any stats and statistics about what a union gets you. Okay, I'm just going to show you a magazine, a couple of magazines. If you're a union member, here's the Teamsters. You might think the Teamsters are great. You might think the Teamsters are terrible, but if you're a member, you get a monthly magazine. Here's the Steelworkers Monthly Magazine. Every month, what do you get? Well, you get a report about people in industries similar to yours. You also get policy analysis as part of your union membership. You get an explanation to you of what's going on in the rest of the economy. And for example here, CEO pay up 937% since 1978. Okay, and there have been folks here earlier in this series that have talked about that. On the other page, this is the Steelworker Monthly, World's Worst Countries for Workers. And it puts the United States definitely in the bottom half of countries when it comes to labor law compliance, right? So let's say you're a member of a Teamster union. What are you going to get in the mail every month? You're going to get a magazine that asks you to remember 1934. Okay, does anybody in here remember 1934?
Sure.
The Teamsters commemorate 1934 Minneapolis strike. Okay, let me read you a passage. Tens of thousands of working people participated in the strike, which began May 16, 1934, and lasted, anybody remember? Throughout the summer. Okay, so what does union membership get you? What does it get you? It gets you analysis economically of what you're dealing with. Okay, and one of the things that we don't have is broad part of our public receiving regular analysis about how economic issues impact them. Right? So this isn't just about the crisis and worker representation. Bill's asked us to talk about some solutions. Okay? So one of the things that everyone in this room can do is to join a group called Working America. WorkingAmerica.org. So unions have less and less of an impact on their individual members because there are fewer and fewer of them. Now, it's still one of the largest, take the labor movement as a whole, it's the largest member-based organization in the country. But as far as its impact on wages, it's getting smaller and smaller. And its impact politically is decreasing and decreasing. Okay? So how does it solve that problem? How does it try to educate people about economic inequality and how it impacts policy? Well, what the AFL-CIO has done is they've created a big tent group called Working America. Okay? And anyone in this room can be a member. The dues are minimal. And what it gets you is it gets you the type of analysis, right, that you would get if you were a union member. So the type of stuff that would come in a monthly magazine, you can get as a newsletter. Right? And what Working America does is it trains groups of people to go out into communities and to talk in low-income neighborhoods about economic issues as economic issues. all right, and tries to separate those issues from the bundles that the political parties like to put them in, okay, and lets people talk one-on-one with trained organizers about how issues like CEO pay affect their daily life. But it has a broad range of issues: healthcare, good jobs, retirement security, quality education for all, corporate accountability, unemployment, and workplace rights. The other thing that Working America has done is it's taken its large membership group and it's responded to what these folks are saying they need help with. And they've created something called fixmyjob.com, right? So there's an app now that labor has created called fixmyjob.com. And what it does is it just lays out for regular folks, whether there's a union involved or not, what are their rights, what are their opportunities, how can they fix their own job. Whether or not a union's interested in organizing or not, people can go directly to the app and learn for themselves. I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention a website called workplacefairness.org, which was created years ago as part of the project of a lawyer here in Cincinnati named Paul Tobias, and that's a place where individuals can go and learn comprehensively what their rights are on the job. So fixmyjob.com, though, is just about collective bargaining and trying to create responses that are immediate, right, and immediate to people who have access to the internet, to this crisis in worker representation. So whether the app will fix anything, I don't know. But the real question that I think the labor movement's trying to resolve is how do we introduce economic inequality back into the conversation. So the fact that groups like Occupy Wall Street gathered some attention and I think shifted the debate. I think that's something that the labor movement found to be very encouraging. In fact, folks might remember that those kids down on Wall Street, they actually got up and took the Brooklyn Bridge. Does anybody remember that? They got out on the Brooklyn Bridge. And one thing that I paid a lot of attention to was the fact that at a certain point, the progressive part of the labor movement, they came down to support those kids. And the swell of support that labor brought really emboldened those young people to do something, to really have an impact. And so, labor has a lot of resources, and they're trying to experiment and find ways to engage the community in different ways. And a group like Working America is one of those ways. I mean, they're trying to be the AARP. They're trying to be, if you are interested in these issues, all you got to do is sign up, and we'll educate you, right? And hopefully that'll change the discussion. So that's kind of a big tent response to the crisis in worker representation. And the other one is the small tent, those small grassroots response to how we deal with the crisis of no one having a voice on the job. So the Workers Center, where I'm happy to work and have been happy to volunteer for years, is a response to the fact that in so much of the workforce, there is no access to a union, right? They're not interested, or they don't speak the language, or it's in an industry that's untouched, or you're in a part of the country where unions are weak. Area code 513 comes to mind, okay? Things can change, things can build, but Cincinnati is not pro-labor, right? So what do folks do in parts of the state or in parts of the country where labor is weak? Where'd they go? Well, years ago, there was nowhere. Now, there's an institution in Cincinnati, and it's one of over 200 similar institutions around the country called worker centers, where if you have a workplace issue, you can find a community-based advocate to help you find the resources that you need. That might be going to a lawyer, that might be connecting with the union, that might be connecting with the government, right, to help enforce your workplace rights. But this new community group called Worker Centers, and they are trying in their own way to respond to the crisis of worker representation that's leading to all these depressed wages. In my opinion, that's where it comes from. So, one of the interesting things, I'll just leave with a couple of questions. Does anyone know AFL-CIO? Big bunch of letters. Who knows what AFL stands for? Right here.
Federation of Labor.
Do you know when it was founded?
Gompers.
When?
28, 29.
1890?
Samuel Johnson.
1886. Here we go. CIO. What does CIO stand for? Now these people know what they're talking about. I hear some more support for the CIO than the AFL. I don't know. Maybe that's just people's memories. CIO. Does anyone know when the CIO was founded?
It's more